Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Amina Husain. I'm Assistant Professor at the Department of English and Modern European and Asian Language at Khwaja Muinuddin Chishti Language University, and in the series of YouTube lectures that we have been delivering, my today's topic is the characteristics of metaphysical poetry. I have discussed metaphysical poets in my previous lecture, and today I'm going to discuss few of their common traits and what makes them as metaphysical poet. We do have few of the metaphysical poets prescribed in our syllabus, like John Donne and Andrew Marvell. So I hope this would be useful to all the students listening, tuned in. Now, looking at the metaphysical poetry that has already been discussed, we know it's meta and physical, which means it is beyond the physicality. And John Donne seems to be the precursor or the pioneer of this tradition, which has been followed famously by Andrew Marvell and the rest. And they were reinvented by T.S. Eliot in his famous essay, The Metaphysical Poet, in the 20th century. And also they have been given this name by Ben Jonson, as we all know. Now, just looking at few of their common traits, or what makes them stand apart from the other tradition of poetry which was flourishing during the Elizabethan time. So first of all is the use of conceit, and the metaphysical poetry is really seldom an expression of what has been expressed earlier. It really is known for its inventiveness, and conceit is where it reaches its most innovative way of expressing the ideas, and it amounts rather in thoughts brought from afar, from the innermost recesses of their own mind. And Donne, we know, speaks of the wreath of his mistress' hair, capable of holding his decaying body together in the grave as his soul did in life, calling it therefore his soul in death. So conceit is the most important aspect of the metaphysical poetry, around which the whole argument is based. Also, the poetry is very argumentative, and it appeals not to the emotions or to the passions, but rather the intellectual or the wit of the reader. It is like a constantly debating a certain point that Donne wants his reader to be convinced of. And poor beloved is, of course, always inscribed in those great monologues. Anyways, coming to the second point, there is the treatment of the inwards. Now, the metaphysical deal not so much with the outward world, as I said, metaphysical. It's like the nature and the human life. The Elizabethan, even when personal, dealt with what was common experience, but metaphysical lived in the world of their own fancy and speak of that only. And this makes their thought very novel and very startling, and that's another aspect of them. It's very dramatic. Metaphysical poetry begins with a start, with a certain kind of a prick, or a certain kind of a pinch, that kind of wakens you from your slumber or from your laziness. So, as a child, Vaughan says in The Retreat, he had a glimpse of the prenatal existence to which he longs to, and I quote, "Some men of forward motion love, but I by backward steps would move." So, another aspect would be very far-fetched or sometimes contradictory images put together, in order to, deliberate on a topic. They're usually the product of unnatural combination, and they're dissimilar objects and ideas that are put forth. And there is obviously no obvious or logical connection between the love and the geographical zone that the Donne makes out in his poetry, and compares it with the least possible objects of comparison, but they make it possible by using lots of wit and lots of images and symbols Another aspect would be the use of hyperboles, in the poetry. And metaphysical poetry actually abounds in hyperboles that not only to be credited but could not only be imagined, And Donne's, for example, Donne's mistress sighs, she exhales not breath but soul. And when she weeps, she sheds not tear but his blood. So these are the exaggerated expressions that we see in the work of metaphysical poets, and more so in Donne, and even in Andrew Marvell to his coy mistress. When Marvell is trying to convince his mistress to yield to his love, he compares his beauty and his long preserved chastity, going to the grave, being eaten by worms, all that. So another aspect that has been credited to the metaphysical poetry has been certain level of some sort of obscurity, for all foregoing reasons. Metaphysical poetry is not easily intelligible, although it appeals to the intellect, but the arguments that are enforced are often confusing. So it requires a lot of attention. It's not so easily comprehensible, and at times could be obscure. Often said that Donne wrote for a very closed circle of people who could actually understand his wit. So in fact, T.S. Eliot says that in trying to find words for their subtle thoughts and feelings, metaphysical failed to carry the readers along with them, a charge that I cannot defend. Now, it's important that Dr. Johnson says that metaphysicals were actually men of learning. They were, of course, men of learning. If you look at any of the poetry of the metaphysical, you see that they also encapsulate the changes in the growing interest and curiosity in the growing and ever expanding world, and especially the geographical explorations and navigation and those images that come abound plenty in Donne's poetry. So I guess you can see that in all their poetry. So thank you very much for this brief discussion on some common traits of metaphysical poets. I hope you all found it useful. Thank you very much for listening.